Today, my guest is author Susan Herman Loomis. We'll be talking about her new cookbook, Nuts in the Kitchen, from William Morrow, an imprint of HarperCollins. Susan Herman Loomis is the author of 9 books, including 7 cookbooks. She's a columnist for France Today and a regular contributor to Cooking Light as well as Culture Today and many, many other magazines. She owns and operates the well-known cooking school on Rue Tatin in Normandy, France, where she lives full-time with her 2 children. We're fortunate to have her on a book and speaking tour in the States, and I'm speaking to her from New York City. Susan, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. It's a delight to be here.
Well, we are very excited about having you on. And the first thing I want to do is I want to begin by getting the laughter-provoking title out of the way. As you say in your book, the entire subject is a potential gold mine. And just give your reason for creating this wonderful book.
Well, Nuts in the Kitchen came about because, not such a funny subject, but I realized how North Americans don't really seem to know how to incorporate nuts into their food. And I live in Europe, and we use nuts in everything from soup to dessert. And I thought with their nutritional attributes, their wonderful flavor, that it was time to show people how to use them.
Well, I agree with that, and I've certainly had the opportunity to read it cover to cover, and I'll tell you, I'm still hungry thinking about it. Let's give my listeners an overview of the book.
Well, the book, it begins with an introduction talking about the way that Americans think nuts is such a hilarious subject. Every time I mention it, people start laughing, But I start out with a little bit of a nutritional overview, which I hope people will read because it's absolutely accurate and up to date. And then once they read it, I hope they'll forget about it, because what I really want people to take away from this book is how delicious nuts are and how easy it is to incorporate them into so many dishes. And the recipes come from all over the world. I traveled extensively to do the research. And I think the recipes are some of the most lively, interesting, flavorful that I've ever published, and I've published a lot of recipes.
It was very interesting reading. I love to read cookbooks anyway. I used to be a food writer, and I still write about food, and certainly involved with the Les Dames group, which are women in the culinary field. But I have to say, I found this book especially interesting for all of those reasons that you've just mentioned. Now, I want to go back and talk about some more of your background, too. France has been your home for many years, and you've first visited Louviers in Normandy in 1980 while you were at the Parisian cooking school of Varennes de Cuisine, a wonderful cooking school. And then you returned to live in France in 1993 with your then husband to write the French Farmhouse Cookbook, which is a lovely cookbook. And then you bought a 12th century house, later writing the book about its renovation called On Rue Tatin, which I read when I first came out, and I really love it. Tell my audience what was the most difficult adjustment, if any, in living in a foreign country, and what it's like now for you to live there as a single woman running 2 cooking schools, one in Louviers and one in Paris.
I love it. You know everything. Probably the hardest part was really just adjusting to a different pace of life and also biting off a big, huge project like renovating a house while trying to, support a family writing cookbooks. I think, that was rather daunting. But other than that, I had spent so much time in France, and I had a small group of friends, and I think that, I chose where we would live based on that group of friends, knowing that would make it so much easier. So the transition was less of a shock than it might have been otherwise. I spoke French. My ex-husband did not speak French, so that was always a challenge. But he, overcame that. And then our son didn't speak a word of French. So probably really the hardest thing was the day we put our son in school and walked away.
Now, when you say you walked away, what do you mean by that?
Well, we left him at school by himself. He didn't speak French. He was 3.5 years old, and we knew that.
Oh,
I knew.
okay. The same feeling I suppose we would have here as in putting our child in kindergarten, and he didn't know the language. That's what you're referring to.
Yes, and I think that I just knew it was the only solution. He had to learn French, and then he would be comfortable. And indeed, he did very quickly learn French, and grew up a French boy, really.
Right. Well, what about the second part of my question? What is it like now? And I think I know the answer, but tell my listeners what it's like to live there now as a single woman. You're writing cookbooks, you've got a family, and you're running 2 cooking schools in Louviers and in Paris.
I'm busy. I'm busy all the time.
That's an understatement.
Busy. Yes. But running 2 cooking schools is, it's a challenge and a joy because I love both venues. And I get to be in Paris much, much more often than I had been in the past because of my classes there. And I love that. And I enjoy, my status has changed a little bit, but it doesn't affect me in any kind of negative way. I actually, I'm fine. I mean, it's just a wonderful place to live, and the lifestyle is terrific, and the food is constantly fascinating. And
well, absolutely, and I know Paris very, very well. And one of my biggest disappointments was I returned to Paris a couple of years ago, and I had wanted to take your class in Paris and just couldn't work it out within the schedule, and that was my biggest disappointment. But I'll be there again one day. That's for sure.
And I will be having more and more classes in Paris, so it'll be easier and easier. I just give day classes there right now, and my plans are to really increase that. So
right.
So next time it'll work out.
But you'll still continue with your school in Louviers because
absolutely.
I know Normandy, but I don't recall that particular town. And if I've been there, it would have been many, many years ago, and and I'm sure I would have remembered it because the architecture, your house is so amazingly wonderful. So
well, it's a town of there are just so many small towns in Normandy, and ours is about 18,000 people, and it's near Rouen and it's near Giverny. But those are the 2 hot spots for tourists.
Mm-hmm.
So we're kind of between them, and it's not necessarily a place anybody would stop except perhaps to look at the church in the center of town.
Right. Well, and I think you also touched on the fact that's very important for any woman, whether she's living with a man who is working in a foreign country and a single woman, and that sounds like you have quite a large network of friends and supporters that you can rely on as well.
Well, I do and I don't. I mean, but I think everybody who lives in a place where they don't have family has the exact same situation. I have French, it's you need a support system, and I have a wonderful group of friends. I sometimes have to hire a babysitter for my daughter. It's just the same thing, and we try to work it out among the friends, but there are just times when it doesn't work out. But I think that both my children are old enough now that they're a big part of the school, and they can take care of themselves pretty much.
And how old are they now?
Well, my son is 19, and my daughter's 11.
And do they still go to the local school, or do they go to school?
My son is a local in New York. He moved to Manhattan, and he's in an art school.
Oh, wonderful.
And my daughter she goes to a local school. It's 5 minutes from the house, and she's about to go into middle school, which will be 5 minutes in the other direction. So she's very much a part of everything.
I'm sure she is.
School, and we're in class, and she loves to eat meals with us when she can, and it's a lot of fun.
Let's get on to the food also, and certainly and your book. French chefs have been concentrating for a while now on incorporating the foods of their former French colonial countries. Now, did that influence your decision to travel to exotic countries like Turkey and Thailand to research many of your recipes and in this current cookbook, and not just do the classic French recipes?
Not really, I don't think. I did focus on that sort of phenomenon in Cooking at Home on Rue Tatin, which is the book before this one. But this book, what really got me traveling is that as a journalist, I'm always curious in the people who are producing the food we eat. And I thought, really to do this right, I need to go to nut-producing countries. And I went to several, and that's really what got me into Turkey. Turkey was special for me because I grew up eating these delicious Turkish pistachios, and I wanted to find out what the story was with them because they're head and shoulders above any pistachio. So, and then Thailand was a place that intrigued me because they incorporate nuts in a way that we almost don't notice, but they're very important. And then the European countries, Italy, Spain, France, of course, and even northern European countries like Sweden and Denmark, especially Sweden, they use a lot of nuts in their cooking in such an easy, natural way. And I thought, I want to go there, talk to producers, talk to cooks, observe how they are used so that I can transmit that information and those flavors.
I want to tell my listeners that this is the Jacqueline Bachar Show, and I'm talking to Susan Herman Loomis, if you've just tuned in, about her new cookbook, Nuts in the Kitchen, from William Morrow Cookbooks, an imprint of HarperCollins. And we're talking about her travels and the book. Let's get to the basic question, Susan. Why are nuts good for us?
Oh, there's so many reasons. I guess one of the major things about them is that they are considered to be an anti-inflammatory, and we're discovering more and more that many modern diseases are a result of inflammation, and that's very simply put. They contribute many minerals, many vitamins, protein, all kinds of things. But I think that they are good for us. The other thing they're really good for is that they're satisfying, so that you can eat if you have done some vigorous physical exercise, or you're in a busy day where you can't manage to sit down to a quiet, comfortable meal. You can stave off hunger by having a handful of almonds or a handful of hazelnuts, and not only are you getting good nutrition, but you'll be satisfied for hours.
Mm-hmm.
So there's just nothing negative about them.
And you do cover that in your book, which is important. Now, you also touch on the fact there's a downside to certain nuts like Brazil nuts and peanuts. I think peanuts are certainly probably the most common allergy-provoking, especially among children, that can cause what is it called? I don't even know. Anaphylactic shock. That's a mouthful.
And, yes, it is, and I talk about that, and I talk about ways that the industry, the producers, are trying to get away from that, because it has to do a little bit with mold and mildew in the nut, and yes, I don't like to focus a lot. I mean, if people have a problem, they generally know it, and I think the more important thing to think about is balance, and if there's a problem with peanuts, there's always a hazelnut to come to the rescue, or an almond. Brazil nuts aren't really bad for people. It's just that you don't want to eat more than 6 a day, but they're so big that you wouldn't be inclined to anyway.
Right. And I'm not sure how many people really eat Brazil nuts like they might nibble on almonds or walnuts or some of those other things.
I think they're more of a peripheral ingredient, and I use them in a pesto, and I use them as a coating for fish, and they're actually very delicious. It's not a nut I loved as a child, but I didn't appreciate it, and I think that now I've come to have so much, I just think they're all so delicious, and I really focused on Brazil nuts when I was doing the research for the book, and I really just love them all. And, I think the main thing about them is they contribute to our nutrition, and they're so easy to use, and they're so delicious.
Well, they are, and have you run across... For instance, in France, I don't remember ever coming across black walnuts, but that was something very, very popular in my childhood. Have you come across what are called black walnuts in France?
I definitely have as a child. They're not an important commercial nut, and one of the decisions I did make before doing this book, there are lots of nuts in different countries that are peripheral, and so I decided to focus on sort of the big 10.
Yeah, I wasn't even sure whether they were available. I know they're not available here, and you used to be able to get black walnut ice cream, which is, I love the flavor of black walnuts, and I haven't seen that for years. So that's a Google point for me that I'm gonna do. The other thing that I think that's important too, and you touched on it in talking about satisfying a little hunger craving with a handful of nuts, and that's important. And also in your book, you do talk about what is a handful. So I think it's important for people to know that.
Yes, and a handful is between 23 and 27 nuts, according to someone who decided that. I'm not sure. I think it was the almond producers who decided
Probably.
that. But, mainly what it is that it's like anything. You eat a certain quantity and you're satisfied.
So I want to just mention right now that the book is in 6 sections and includes recipes from breakfast to dessert, as well as a special chapter called the Basics. Tell us about at least one of your favorite recipes at this point.
Ooh, this is a hard
I know it's tough.
Because, there are only 100 recipes in here and they're all delicious.
I know. Well, just pick one. I know you have more than one, but pick one that you'd like to.
I think one that I love to talk about is called dukkah, and it's a condiment.
That's good, because I was going to ask you about that. So say that word again and spell it.
Dukkah, D-U-K-K-A-H, and it's a combination of toasted almonds and hazelnuts with coriander and cumin and salt and hot paprika. And you mix it up and you grind everything, you toast everything and grind it together, and then that mixture can be used in 1,000 ways. And I got the recipe. Well, it's a combination of many recipes, but it comes from the Middle East. And when I was in Turkey, dukkah was always on the breakfast table. It's something that you can use as an aperitif. You can put it next to a bowl of extra virgin olive oil and have people dip bread into the oil and then into the dukkah. It's a crunchy, toasty, herby, delicious mixture.
You had mentioned in the book that you had some American gals in one of your classes that were talking a lot about it. Now, I pride myself on keeping up with food, but this is a new one to me, and I'm anxious to make it.
Well, it actually somehow kind of got out of the Middle East, went to Australia, and yes, I heard about it first from my students, and I didn't really think about it much. But then I was in Oregon, and people were using it and talking about it, and then I went to Turkey, and it was everywhere. And so I had to include it in the book, and it's consistently one of the most delicious favorite things that I serve at my table.
Well, I'm going to try that one, and I just want to tell you that one of my personal favorites is the coconuts with fleur de sel, and that was a recipe from David Leibovitz. And when I was in Paris a couple of years ago, I had the pleasure of being with David and a couple of other well-known chocolate people on the chocolate tour.
Oh, wonderful.
So I'm anxious to try that one. I'm going to an event on Monday, as a matter of fact, and I'm going to make that and mention your name. We'll be talking about that in your cookbook.
Well, thank you, and you'll find they'll disappear in moments.
Oh, I believe it. I believe it. In fact, I'm hoping I'll be able to get them there and not eat them all beforehand. This is a good time to give my listeners your website address, because I want them to learn all about your classes as well. So why don't you give that now?
I've got the website is www.susanloomis.com, and it's all about En route à Town, my school. I also have a blog that is called nutsinthekitchen.com, and I'd love to have people go take a look at that.
Yes, I haven't had the chance to look at it yet, and I think that would be a good one, especially since we're talking about your cookbook.
Yeah, and at susanloomis.com you'll learn all about my classes, about where I live, about the town I live in, and then it gives a schedule of classes, and there's a sign-up form you can fill out, and I'll look forward to welcoming some of your listeners to my classes. Well,
I hope so, and I hope to be able to participate somewhere along the line. You're also on a book tour now, as well as you're going to be doing a couple of classes in the States. What are some of your stops for your book tour, first of all?
Well, actually, I'm sort of on the tail end of my book tour. For this leg of it, I'm going back in July. I'll be in Portland, Oregon. I'm giving a 3-day class there, actually, in the first week of August. I'll be in Seattle, Washington. I'll be in San Francisco, in Corte Madera, which is in Northern California. It looks like I'm going to be heading down to L.A. for a couple of days.
In July?
That'll be in July and August. And then over Labor Day, I'm teaching up in Maine. I'll be in Boston for an event there. And then in November, I'll be spending some time in Arizona. I've got a whole list of events to do there.
So basically, you're going to be spending the summer in the States. Is that right?
Basically, I'll be in the States for about a month. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And then back again in November. Well, that's quite a tour. And
back in September and then again in November.
Yeah. Well, like I say, I hope to see you somewhere along the line in one of those classes or one of your book tours.
I would welcome you.
Thank you. I'm trying to work that out. One of the things that I thought was fun as a food writer and someone who has worked on a cookbook, you talked about your kids eating nut dishes for quite a long time. I think it was over the 3 years that you were involved in writing the book. And I think my listeners would be interested in knowing, first of all, how do you go about developing a recipe? And what are the different techniques for an original recipe versus an adaptation? And are there any inherent problems in both of those?
I don't view them as problems. I think what I primarily work from are ideas I get from other people. So when I traveled to Turkey, I came home with just dozens of recipes I wanted to test and make publication ready. There's a lot of work involved because you make the recipe. First I write it up, and then I make it, and then I see all the pitfalls, and then I go back and make it, and keep correcting until it's someplace where I want it to be, and it's either tasting the way it was when I first had it, or something. An original recipe will come to me. I'll be working in the kitchen, all of a sudden I'll think, well, wow, that would make a great combination. So I always have a pad of paper in the kitchen, and I write down everything I do, all the quantities, type it up, and then I'll go back and really test it as though it was a recipe someone else had given to me. The pitfalls are the time. It's just the time that it takes, and I'll know what I want, and sometimes it'll take me 2 or 3 tests to get there, or more. But if a recipe isn't working out and I've tested it 4 or 5 times, I give up.
Now, do you work in our English measurements? I mean, our American measurements, or do you work in?
No, I work in metrics, but I translate everything into American ingredients, and then I send every recipe to someone in the U.S. to test with American ingredients just to be sure that they work.
Well, that was the thing that I found. I did live in Europe and came back with a lot of recipes in the metric system. And I think for an American, now certainly you're experienced, you went to cooking school and so you learned all of that. But I think that's one of the big problems for American cooks, translating from the metric system into our system. And it does certainly change it. The other thing that I see too that can be a problem, and I'm sure you found that yourself, being unable to get the particular ingredients that they might use in a country.
Well, that's much less of a problem today with the internet. And I know in any recipe that I run, I always offer substitution if there's a problem. But I think what I've found is that everything is obtainable these days. I mean, it used to be much more of a problem. And now, if there's not the specific ingredient, there's always a substitution.
Yeah, well,
and I will give that.
You're absolutely right. These days, if one spends enough time on the internet, you can find anything. So that's absolutely correct. Do you now? I didn't see that in this book. I might have missed it. Do you give resources for these ingredients?
I don't. That was all prepared, and somehow when the book was published, it didn't get in there. But it's pretty straightforward. I mean, you just have to Google, the certain type of nut you're looking for, and there are mail order sources, and there are good ones out there.
Well, the thing I liked about the book is also the fact that they are easily obtainable ingredients that you've used. I think maybe there was just 1 or 2 that I was uncertain about, and it doesn't come into my head right now which one it was. But I probably will send you an email when I find out what it is and ask you where to get it or the substitution. But that I think that's the thing that any American cook working with really likes. And I don't see that any of these have any great difficulty.
No, this is a collection of very delicious, very doable recipes for the home cook, and yet I know that these recipes will also show up in restaurant kitchens because I can't count the number of times I've gone to restaurants and ordered something that ended up being an idea that I recognize.
Oh, sure.
And I think that's a wonderful compliment, but I don't think anybody should feel that there's not one recipe in this book that isn't very, very doable.
Now, you talked about your favorite recipe. What would you say is one of the more unusual recipes in this current book?
Well, there's a tagine, which is a dish from northern Africa, the Maghreb, and it's unusual. It's very easy to do, but it's unusual in that it has orange flower water in it, and it's got honey in it. It's got almonds sprinkled in at the last minute. It's a very aromatic dish with cinnamon and ginger and saffron, and that's just a lovely, lovely dish. There's another one that's hanger steak layered with horseradish and walnuts, and that is unbelievably delicious. The dessert recipes are fun. The lemon poppy seed ice cream is absolutely simple to make and completely amazing.
I like.
And then there's a recipe for pfeffernusse, which is a lovely cookie with lots of honey. And once you make this huge batch, and they literally keep all year.
My grandma used to make those, so that was very nostalgic for me when I read that one. I also like the fact that you make your own almond milk, and then you have a recipe in here for a savory or sweet almond sprinkle made from the leftover almond pulp.
When you make almond milk, you literally soak almonds in water, puree them, and drain off the liquid, and that's almond milk. But you're left with a lot of solid almond. The sort of not really pureed, but lots of almond. And I thought, there's too much flavor. I tasted it. There's so much flavor left in it. So I ended up toasting that, and half of it I made savory, half of it I made sweet to see which I liked better. And I love them both. And so when you have that savory powder in your kitchen, and I keep mine in the freezer, you can add that to dessert. You can add the sweet one to desserts. You can put it in cookie dough or put it on top of a cake. And the savory one you can add to pasta or chicken or anything, really. Or yogurt, or it's just they ended up being really favorite things in the book.
You've got another one in here that is very, very simple, but I wasn't familiar with it. Now, I used to do a lot of shopping in Japanese supermarket outside of L.A., and maybe I know this gomashio, but perhaps I just didn't know the name. And it sounds so easy to do. And talk about that, and what do you use it for?
Well, gomashio is something that I was familiar with for a long time as a vegetarian. It's something that gets used a lot because sesame seeds have a certain amount of protein in them. And you just toast sesame seeds and mix them with salt and then sprinkle it over brown rice or white rice or pasta or fish or, it's very Asian because of the sesame seeds. And so it can go, you can steam spinach and put it on top. It's a very versatile condiment, and I use it like salt. So I have it, I have salt, pepper, and gomashio in my sort of seasoning area, and very versatile and delicious.
Well, they're all delicious, and I'm getting hungry. I think that, in my opinion, now tell me if I'm wrong, that I felt that perhaps one of the, we won't say the word difficult, but maybe the one that I thought would be a little challenging is the nougat glacé.
Mm-hmm. It's not difficult at all. In fact, that's a recipe that people are making. People are coming up to me at my book signings and saying, I made the nougat glacé, it's delicious. You need to make a praline, which is cooking nuts and sugar, and then cracking that and adding it into the nougat glacé, but there's nothing difficult about it at all.
Well,
and
good. Well,
the way the recipe's written, it just sort of, I try to hold your hand through every step of it.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I think I was thinking about the heat in the valley here and the air conditioning, but we won't worry about that. I'm going to try.
Don't worry about
I'm going to try all of them. And I am so sad to say that we are out of time, and I have to say goodbye. But I will be in touch with you again. Thank you so much for being with us. I know my listeners will enjoy this show. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you so much. It was really a pleasure.